First contact in the desert. Sarah Chen hadn't seen another living soul in 3 days, which was exactly how she liked it. As a senior ranger at the Mojave National Preserve, she learned to read the desert like a book. Every track in the sand, every disturbed rock formation told a story. That's why the strange tracks cutting across the valley floor made her blood run cold. They started abruptly, as if something had dropped from the sky, creating a shallow trench that stretched for nearly half a mile. The disturbed earth glowed faintly in the pre-dawn light, traces of an iridescent substance catching the starlight. Sarah checked her satellite phone. No signal, just like the last 6 hours. Something was interfering with communications across her entire sector. Following the tracks, she kept one hand on her tranquilizer rifle. After 15 years of rescuing lost hikers and relocating dangerous wildlife, she'd learned to trust her instincts. Every one of them was screaming that this was different. The trail led to a narrow canyon she'd never explored before. As she rounded the bend, Sarah froze. Ahead lay something that defied explanation. A craft about the size of a small bus, its surface rippling like liquid metal in the starlight. It had crashed into the canyon wall, leaving a deep gouge in the ancient rock. But what struck her most was how it seemed to absorb the darkness around it, as if light itself behaved differently in its presence. A soft, rhythmic pulsing drew her attention. It wasn't mechanical, more like a heartbeat, if hearts could beat in colors. Following the sound, she discovered a tear in the craft's hull. Inside, something moved. Sarah's flashlight beam revealed a being that simultaneously confirmed and shattered every theory humanity had about alien life. It was roughly humanoid, but that's where the similarities ended. Its body seemed to be composed of crystalline structures that shifted and flowed like liquid, catching her flashlight's beam and refracting it in impossible patterns. Where a human would have a face, this being had what appeared to be a geometric arrangement of sensory organs that emitted a soft, phosphorescent glow. The alien was clearly injured. The crystalline structure of its torso had fractures running through it, and what she assumed was its equivalent of blood, a luminescent fluid, was pooling beneath it. When the being noticed her, it emitted a series of musical tones that seemed to resonate in her chest. The sound carried unmistakable notes of pain and fear. Sarah had heard similar sounds from injured animals over the years. Some things, it seemed, were universal. "I'm here to help," she said softly, moving slowly with her hands visible. 2 decades of handling wounded wildlife had taught her that fear could make any being dangerous. But the alien showed no aggression. Instead, its crystalline structure shifted, creating patterns that seemed almost hopeful. Sarah was about to move closer when a new sound cut through the night. Helicopter rotors, multiple sets, approaching fast. The alien's phosphorescent glow pulsed rapidly, its musical tones becoming sharp and urgent. Without fully understanding how, Sarah knew it was afraid of whoever was coming. She had seconds to make a decision that would change everything. Protocol said she should wait for authorities. Common sense said she should run. But 2 decades of protecting this desert and its inhabitants had taught her to follow a different protocol. Help first, ask questions later. "Can you move?" she asked, making walking motions with her hands. The alien structure shifted again, and it attempted to rise but collapsed. Sarah moved forward, prepared to assist. As she touched its surface, a jolt of energy passed between them, not painful, but intense. In that moment, images flashed through her mind. A vast space station orbiting a ringed planet, a laboratory filled with intricate crystal structures, and overwhelming terror as something massive and dark pursued through the stars. The helicopters were getting closer. Sarah could now see searchlights sweeping the desert floor. The alien's glow dimmed, and she felt another sensation through their contact. Trust, tinged with desperation. Making her decision, Sarah unclipped her rescue harness and began securing it around the alien's form. "I don't know who's after you," she whispered, "but I know this desert better than anyone. We have a ranger station 12 miles north through the canyon system. If we can reach it, There's an underground storage bunker from the old mining days. No one knows about it except me." The alien's crystalline structure shifted in what she hoped was agreement. As Sarah helped it up, supporting its weight, she noticed how its surface adapted to her touch, becoming less rigid where they made contact. The being was obviously designed for environments humans could barely imagine. Yet here they were, two sentient creatures united by the simple need to survive. They had just made it into the shadow of the canyon wall when the first helicopter crested the ridge. Sarah glimpsed black aircraft with no markings, definitely not military or park service. The alien pressed closer to the rock face, and to her amazement, its crystalline structure began taking on the coloration and texture of the surrounding stone. As searchlights swept overhead, Sarah made eye contact with the being. Its sensory organs pulsed once, and another image filled her mind. A massive star map, with Earth marked as a safe haven, a sanctuary. She understood then that this wasn't just about saving one life. This might be humanity's first step into a much larger universe. But first, they had to survive the night. As the helicopters began landing in the valley below, Sarah guided her extraordinary companion deeper into the canyon system. She knew every hidden path, every cave, and every water source in these mountains. For the first time, she was grateful for all those lonely years learning the desert's secrets. The aliens' musical tones had softened to a quiet hum that matched their footsteps. As they moved through the darkness, Sarah realized that in all her years of protecting this preserve, she'd never imagined she'd be using her knowledge to shelter a visitor from the stars. Dawn was still hours away, and their journey was just beginning. But as they made their way north, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since her first days as a ranger. The pure exhilaration of venturing into the unknown, of being part of something much bigger than herself. The desert night wrapped around them like a protective blanket as they pressed on. Two beings from unimaginably different worlds, united by circumstance and the universal language of compassion. Behind them, the search parties began to spread out, but Sarah smiled. She knew these canyons held 1,000 places to hide, and she knew every single one of them. Rust through understanding. The old mining bunker was exactly as Sarah remembered it, a concrete box buried 20 feet underground, forgotten by everyone except the desert rats and herself. As she helped her crystalline companion down the rusted ladder, the alien's bioluminescence provided the only light, casting prismatic shadows on the walls. Sarah had spent the last 6 hours guiding them through a maze of canyons, doubling back, and using dry creek beds to mask their trail. Her years of tracking poachers had taught her every trick for losing pursuers in this terrain. Now those same skills were being used to evade black helicopters and unmarked vehicles that continued to comb the desert. Once inside, the alien's crystalline structure relaxed, shifting from the camouflage patterns it had maintained during their journey back to its natural state. In the confined space of the bunker, Sarah could finally study her companion properly. The being's body seemed to be composed of interlocking geometric shapes that flowed like liquid crystal, each facet capable of transmitting and refracting light in ways that defied physics. The injuries from the crash were still evident, fractures in its crystalline structure that pulsed with dim light. The alien moved to a corner of the bunker and began emitting a series of complex harmonics. To Sarah's amazement, small fragments of crystal began growing from the wounds, slowly knitting together like living sutures. "Self-healing," Sarah murmured. "Incredible." The alien's sensory organs pulsed in response, and another series of images flashed through her mind. Vast laboratories filled with similar crystals, each one programmed for different medical purposes. Sarah understood. This being wasn't just a visitor from another world, but a scientist, perhaps even a doctor. A sharp burst of static from her radio made them both jump. Sarah had kept it off during their escape, but now she needed to check in or risk raising suspicion. When she turned it on, her colleague Mike's voice crackled through. "Sarah, you copy? We've got feds swarming the preserve. Something about a meteorite. All rangers are supposed to report in. Sarah took a deep breath. Copy that, Mike. I'm up in Sector 7, checking the bighorn sheep trails. Nothing unusual to report. The lie tasted bitter, but she knew what would happen if she told the truth. She'd seen enough shadowy government operations in her years here to know this wouldn't end well for her new friend. The alien watched her intently during the exchange, its crystalline structure subtly shifting to match the radio's frequencies. After she signed off, it extended one limb toward her radio. The surface of its crystalline appendage transformed, creating intricate patterns that mimicked the device's internal circuitry. Suddenly, Sarah's radio came alive with a cascade of musical tones, similar to the alien's voice but structured differently, almost like code. The being's sensory organs pulsed rapidly, and new images filled Sarah's mind. Vast networks of crystalline communications arrays, connecting distant worlds through harmonics rather than radio waves. You're trying to contact your people, Sarah realized. The alien structure rippled in what she was beginning to recognize as affirmation. But before they could explore this further, heavy vehicles rumbled overhead. They both froze, listening to the convoy pass. The alien's glow dimmed to almost nothing, and Sarah felt waves of anxiety radiating from its crystalline form. More images flooded her mind. The same dark shapes that had chased the alien through space, but now she saw them clearly, massive crystalline beings, their structures jagged and opaque, radiating cold purpose. The alien scientist had discovered something that made them pursue it across the galaxy. Sarah felt her way to her emergency supplies and pulled out a solar-powered lantern. In its steady light, she began clearing space on the bunker's dusty floor. "Show me," she said, pointing to her head and then to the ground. "Help me understand." The alien seemed to consider for a moment, then extended its limbs. The crystalline structure flowed like liquid mercury, forming complex three-dimensional shapes in the air. Sarah watched in awe as entire star systems took shape before her eyes, showing the alien's journey to Earth. But more than that, she began to understand what it had been working on. A way to program crystalline structures for universal medical applications, something that could revolutionize healing across species. That's when everything clicked into place. The strange interference with communications, the way it could manipulate its structure, even heal itself. It all came down to the fundamental properties of these living crystals. The alien wasn't just carrying this technology, it was a working example of it. A distant explosion made the bunker's walls shudder. The search was getting more aggressive. The alien structure rippled with distress, its glow fluctuating wildly. Sarah moved closer, placing her hand against its surface. The now familiar energy passed between them. But this time she pushed back with her own emotions. Determination, protection, hope. "We'll find a way," she said firmly. "But first, we need to get you somewhere safer. Those hunters up there, they don't know this desert. Not like I do. Not like we will." The alien's glow stabilized, and its crystalline structure shifted to mirror the texture of her hand where they touched. A gesture she somehow knew meant trust. Together, they began planning their next move, two beings from different worlds sharing knowledge that could change both their civilizations. Outside, the desert wind howled across the canyon tops, masking the sound of helicopters and vehicles. But down in their underground sanctuary, Sarah and her extraordinary companion were building something powerful. An alliance born of necessity but growing into something more. With every passing hour, they learned more about each other's worlds, developing a language of touch, light, and shared understanding. As night fell above them, Sarah realized that her life's path, all those years learning every secret of this harsh landscape, had been preparing her for exactly this moment. She was no longer just a ranger protecting a preserve. She was now a guardian of something far more precious, the beginning of a bridge between worlds. Hunters and hunted. 3 days in the bunker had taught Sarah more about alien civilization than humanity had learned in centuries of searching the stars. Through their evolving communication of images, harmonics, and touch, she now knew her crystalline companion's name, or at least the closest approximation she could understand. Aurora, named for the way its kind's natural bioluminescence resembled Earth's polar lights. Aurora was part of a collective of research scientists working to revolutionize medical technology across known space. Their breakthrough came in programming crystalline structures to adapt to any biological form, potentially creating universal healing technology. But their discovery had attracted unwanted attention. A deep rumble overhead interrupted Sarah's thoughts. The search patterns had changed, becoming more systematic, more professional. These weren't government agents anymore. They were something else entirely. Aurora's structure tensed, edges becoming sharp and angular. Through their connection, Sarah felt a spike of recognition and terror. New images filled her mind. Massive crystalline beings, their structures black as deep space, absorbing light rather than refracting it. The Void Hunters, as Aurora's people called them, were mercenaries who had evolved their crystalline forms for combat, sacrificing their natural luminescence for deadly efficiency. "They followed you here," Sarah whispered, understanding at last. "All the way from your home system." Aurora's structure rippled in confirmation, projecting images of a desperate flight across star systems, staying just ahead of the hunters who meant to steal their research and use it for warfare rather than healing. Sarah's radio crackled to life. "All units, be advised. We have confirmation of external contact." Switching to secure channel Delta. The voice was different, colder, more professional than the federal agents from before. Aurora's crystalline surface froze in recognition of the voice pattern. Through their link, Sarah saw a terrifying vision. The Void Hunters had infiltrated human organizations, disguising themselves as government operatives. They'd been on Earth for months, waiting for one of the research collective to arrive. Her desert wasn't just a random crash site, it was a trap. A new sound cut through the bunker, a high-pitched resonance that made Sarah's teeth ache. Aurora's structure began to vibrate, edges becoming unstable. The hunters were using some kind of crystalline detection technology, sending pulses through the ground. "We need to move," Sarah said, already gathering her supplies. "They'll find us soon." But Aurora projected an image that made her pause. The crashed ship, and within it, something vital. The research data was still there, stored in a crystalline matrix that could revolutionize medical science across the galaxy. If the Void Hunters got it, they would corrupt it into a weapon. Sarah checked her map. The crash site was 5 miles east, now certainly swarming with hunters. It seemed impossible, but then she smiled. "Impossible is just another day in the desert," she said, a phrase she used countless times during difficult rescues. They emerged from the bunker under cover of a sandstorm, common this time of year, and brutal enough to ground the helicopters. Sarah had wrapped Aurora in reflective emergency blankets, masking their bioluminescence. Together they moved through the howling wind, Sarah navigating by feel and memory, while Aurora used their crystalline senses to detect approaching threats. The storm works both for and against them. While it provided cover, it also meant they couldn't spot the hunters until they were dangerously close. Twice they had to press themselves into rock crevices as dark figures passed within feet of them. Their crystalline forms somehow wrong, too sharp, too absent of light. As they neared the crash site, Aurora suddenly pulled them behind a boulder. Moments later, 2 Void Hunters emerged from the swirling sand. Up close, they were terrifying. Their crystalline forms seemed to swallow light, creating patches of unnatural darkness in the already dim storm. They moved with predatory grace, their structures flowing like liquid obsidian. Sarah felt Aurora trembling beside her, their natural luminescence barely contained by the emergency blankets. Through their connection, she realized why. These weren't just any hunters, but the same ones who had chased Aurora across the stars. They knew their prey was close. The hunters split up, their dark forms disappearing into the storm. Sarah waited, counting her heartbeats, then led them forward. The crash site had been transformed. Black crystalline structures had grown around the ship like a cage, pulsing with the same resonance they'd heard in the bunker. But Sarah saw something the hunters had missed, a gap in their crystalline barrier, right where the canyon wall had been weakened by the initial crash. Years of studying the desert's geology told her that section was unstable, riddled with natural caves and fissures. "The ship's right above us," she whispered, pointing to the canyon wall. "There's a whole network of caves behind that rock face. If we can't go through their barrier..." Aurora's structure rippled with understanding. They would go around it. But as they began moving toward the cave entrance, a shadow detached itself from the storm behind them. Sarah turned to see a void hunter looming over them, its crystalline form seeming to drink in what little light remained in the storm. The hunter raised an appendage that had transformed into something weapon-like, its structure humming with deadly energy. But before it could strike, Aurora pushed Sarah aside and did something extraordinary. Their entire crystalline form burst into brilliant light, releasing years of stored solar energy in a blinding flash. The void hunter recoiled, its light-absorbing structure overwhelmed by the sudden radiance. Sarah didn't waste the opportunity. She grabbed Aurora and pulled them into the cave entrance, just as the hunter's weapon discharged, causing a cascade of rocks to fall behind them. They were safe from the hunters for the moment, but now they were trapped underground with limited options and time running out. As they caught their breath in the darkness, lit only by Aurora's dimmed glow, Sarah realized that the next few minutes would determine not just their fate, but potentially the future of medical science across the galaxy. The cave's walls reflected Aurora's light in complex patterns, and Sarah was struck by an idea. Sometimes in the desert, the most dangerous path was also the only way forward. Now she just had to convince her alien friend to trust in one more impossible plan: the breaking storm. The cave system was a maze of twisted passages, but Sarah moved with purpose. 20 years of exploring these canyons had taught her that the desert's surface was only half the story. Beneath the sand and rock lay an intricate network of caves, carved by ancient underground rivers. "The ship is directly above us," Sarah whispered, pointing to the cave ceiling. Through their mental connection, Aurora shared their understanding of the crystalline barrier the void hunters had created, a cage of dark crystal that absorbed energy and prevented escape. But Sarah knew something the hunters didn't. The geology of this place was on their side. Aurora's glow provided just enough light to navigate by, casting prismatic reflections off the mineral-streaked walls. The alien scientist had been steadily regaining strength, their crystalline structure now flowing with more confidence, but they both knew time was running out. Above them, they could hear the resonant hum of the hunters' detection equipment growing stronger. Sarah led them to a chamber where the cave ceiling rose high into darkness. Years ago, she'd discovered this place had a peculiar property. The rock was shot through with quartz veins that carried sound in unexpected ways. She'd often heard storms raging on the surface while standing in this very spot. "Your people," Sarah said, placing her hand against Aurora's surface. "They communicate through crystalline harmonics, right?" The alien structure rippled in confirmation, projecting images of vast crystal arrays used for interstellar communication. Sarah smiled. "Well, these caves might not be as sophisticated, but they have their own way of singing." Her plan was audacious, perhaps impossible. But Aurora had already shown her that impossible was just another word for something they hadn't tried yet. Through their connection, she shared her idea. Use the natural crystal formations in the cave to amplify Aurora's communications abilities, turning the entire underground system into one massive transmitter. The alien scientist's structure pulsed with excitement, understanding the potential. But they also shared a concern. Such a powerful transmission would attract the void hunters immediately. Sarah nodded grimly. "That's counting on it." They set to work quickly. Aurora extended crystalline tendrils that merged with the cave's natural quartz veins, their bioluminescence spreading through the mineral structures like living lightning. Sarah used her knowledge of the cave system to guide the connections, creating a network that spanned hundreds of feet in all directions. Above them, The hunter's resonance detector suddenly went silent. They'd been noticed. Aurora's entire form began to vibrate, generating harmonics that made the cave walls sing. Through their mental link, Sarah understood they were sending out a distress signal, not just to their own people, but to anyone who might be listening. The message contained everything: the medical breakthroughs, the chase across the stars, and humanity's first willing contact with alien life. The cave ceiling cracked as dark crystalline forms began to push through. The Void Hunters had found them, but Sarah had planned for this too. She pulled out her radio and emergency flares, modified over the past days with Aurora's help to interact with crystalline technology. "Your hunters adapted their structures for combat," she said, striking the first flare. "But they forgot something important about evolution." The magnesium flame cast harsh light through the chamber, reflecting and refracting off the crystal-lined walls. Sometimes old weaknesses never quite go away. The first Void Hunter dropped into the cave, its dark form seeming to drink in the darkness. But when Sarah threw the flare, the hunter's light-absorbing structure worked against it. Unable to process the sudden, intense light fast enough, its crystalline form became rigid, momentarily frozen. Aurora seized the opportunity, their own structure flaring with accumulated solar energy. The combination of light and harmonics created a cascading effect through the crystal-lined cave system. The hunter's form began to crack, its carefully maintained darkness shattering under the assault. More hunters poured in, but each met the same fate, caught between Aurora's harmonics and the natural amplification of the cave system, their specialized structures unable to adapt quickly enough to the overload of energy. Yet Sarah knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The flares would run out, and Aurora was expending massive amounts of energy. That's when they heard it. A new resonance, different from the hunter's frequencies. Through their connection, Sarah felt Aurora's surge of joy. The message had been received. Help was coming. But the Void Hunters had one last move. Their leader, a massive crystalline form that seemed to absorb even the flare's light, descended into the cave. Its structure was different from the others, adapted and evolved through countless battles. With horrifying speed, it began to transform, growing weapons from its crystalline surface. Sarah's last flare sputtered out, leaving them illuminated only by Aurora's dimming glow. The hunter leader loomed over them, its form resolving into something that seemed designed for one purpose: destroying other crystalline beings. But Sarah Chen, veteran ranger of the Movav, had learned long ago that the desert's greatest lesson was this: survival often meant adaptation. And she had one last card to play. One final impossible gamble that would either save them or doom them all. The question was, would Aurora trust her enough to try it? A bridge between stars. In the crystalline-lined cave, time seemed to slow as Sarah locked eyes with Aurora. Through their connection, she shared her desperate plan. Not in images this time, but in pure emotion and intent. 20 years of reading the desert signs had taught her that sometimes survival meant becoming one with your environment. The Void Hunter leader's dark crystalline form towered over them, its structure humming with deadly purpose. But Sarah had noticed something in their battles. Each time the hunters absorbed energy, their forms briefly synchronized with whatever they were draining. It was their greatest strength, and potentially their fatal weakness. "Trust me," Sarah whispered, pressing her palm against Aurora's surface. The alien scientist's structure rippled with understanding, and, remarkably, hope. They had come too far, crossed too many stars, to give up now. Aurora's form began to change, not hardening for combat like the hunters, but becoming more fluid, more adaptive. To Sarah's amazement, the crystalline structure flowed around her, not consuming but embracing. She felt no fear, only a profound sense of connection as they merged. Human consciousness meeting alien crystalline awareness in a synthesis never before attempted. The hunter leader struck, its weaponized appendages slicing through the air. But instead of meeting resistance, its energy-draining structure found something unprecedented. A hybrid form that was neither purely crystalline nor purely organic. Sarah's human biology, working in concert with Aurora's crystalline matrix, created patterns the hunters' adapted weapons couldn't process. Through their merged consciousness, Sarah shared her lifetime of desert knowledge, how life here survived not by fighting the environment, but by becoming part of it. Aurora contributed their scientific understanding, allowing their combined form to interact with the cave's crystal structures in ways neither could achieve alone. The cave itself began to respond, the natural crystal formations resonating with their shared energy. The hunter leader's attempts to absorb their power only connected it to this growing network. Each attack linked it more deeply to the very frequencies it was trying to drain. That's when the cavern erupted with light, not from above, but from the walls themselves. The message Aurora had sent hadn't just been received, it had been answered. The crystal veins in the rock glowed with impossible colors as new harmonics filled the space, carrying the signatures of a dozen different alien species. Their signal had reached the Galactic Medical Collective, and the response was overwhelming. The hunter leader's dark crystalline form began to fracture, overwhelmed by the complexity of energies it couldn't absorb or process. Its carefully evolved combat adaptations, designed for domination and destruction, proved useless against something entirely new, a synthesis of human and alien, of biology and crystal, of science and survival instinct. As the hunter's form finally shattered, its fragments dissolving into inert crystal, Sarah and Aurora gently separated. Both were forever changed by their momentary union, having glimpsed possibilities neither species had imagined before. The cave ceiling dissolved in a cascade of light as rescue ships pierced the storm above. The medical collective had arrived in force, their vessels beautiful crystalline structures that refracted the desert sunlight in dazzling patterns. But they weren't alone. Sarah recognized the insignia of human aircraft among them. Her radio crackled with familiar voices as her ranger colleagues responded to the impossible sight of first contact. Aurora's structure pulsed with joy as they projected one final image to Sarah, a future where human resilience and alien technology worked together, where the medical breakthroughs they'd protected would benefit all species. But more than that, they shared a vision of this moment spreading across the galaxy. The story of how a desert ranger and a crystalline scientist had bridged the gap between stars. Sarah looked up at the ships descending through the broken storm, their lights painting the desert in colors she'd never seen before. "Welcome to Earth," she said both to the arriving aliens and to Aurora. "Though I guess we got some explaining to do." Aurora's crystalline form shimmered with what Sarah now recognized as laughter. Through their lingering connection, they shared a final thought. Explanations wouldn't be necessary. Their merged consciousness had already shown both their peoples everything they needed to know about trust, adaptation, and the unlimited possibilities when different species chose to work together. As human and alien ships landed around them, Sarah realized that her years of reading the desert signs had prepared her for something far greater than she'd ever imagined. She had helped write the first chapter of humanity's new story among the stars, not as conquerors or victims, but as partners in a galaxy far more wonderful and diverse than anyone had dreamed. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. A storm was coming, not one of dust and thunder, but of change and possibility. And for the first time in human history, we weren't facing it alone.